On this episode of Dear Becky B, I am going to be talking a lot about trauma bonding and the letter that I wrote to my 24-year-old to 27-year-old self. Um, has a lot to do with this topic and has some examples in there. It was a bit of a challenge for me to write this letter. I am trying to decide what to include for examples and how many. Um, it can be triggering for a lot of reasons, domestic violence reasons, I would say, and also religious trauma. So just with that in mind, I think trauma bonding is something that a lot of people don't know about or understand. So I thought it would be a good idea to talk about that and how it uh, continues the cycle of abuse and how it keeps people together. And uh, a question I heard a lot, and all sorts of women hear this question, or men when they leave abusive situations. People in general leaving abusive situations can be anybody who identify in any way. So, but yeah, so trauma bonding explains how this keeps a victim in a relationship. So it's neurochemistry, neuroscience, brain chemistry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So um, it's kind of like I guess it can be a brain chemistry addiction, or I don't know, a lot of people call it codependence. That's what I called it when I realized that's what I was doing. I don't like the term codependent really anymore to explain this. I feel it's kind of pejorative and kind of puts a lot of blame on the victim. But also, I think that it, I mean, if that's how somebody identifies, I mean, it means something to them. But it's a word that's been used to describe this brain chemistry thing that happens in trauma bonding and abusive relationships. So in an abusive relationship, there's like some unpredictable. It's like I've talked about the cycle of abuse before. There's this really good periods where things are going really well. Then there's a tension building phase, and then explosions, or well, it can be explosions, or like a lot of fighting. A really bad phase, right? And then there's the repair phase, and then it goes again. And so, what trauma bonding is it's this chemical addiction that's driven by intermittent reinforcement. There are unpredictable highs of affection and the lows of abuse. And so, during abuse, the brain is flooded with intense stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, because those are activated as part of the fear response, the fight, flight, or freeze response during abuse. And so then when the abuse is over and in the repair phase in these toxic cycles, in the repair and the honeymoon phase or good phase, it's their bonding hormones or bonding, yeah, hormones and brain chemistry bond you to this person. So oxytocin, dopamine are are released in your brain during the reconciliation. So it creates this loop, right, where you are always trying to get back to that high and to that good place because you felt it and you think that that can happen. And so trauma bonding is problematic because in an abusive relationship, because you go to your abuser for the repair, and then those hormones bond you together again, and it just creates this really confusing cycle that's really hard to get out of. Um, so dopamine is like a craving and reward chemical in our brains. And during the good times, like love bombing, or when an abuser is showing affection, it spikes. You release more dopamine, and because the rewards are inconsistent, like I explained previously about intermittent reinforcement in my last recording, the brain creates this uh, loop, if you will. And then the oxytocin is bonding. Mothers release oxytocin when they have a baby, bonding with the baby. But this is released in relationships like during physical touch and sex and, that emotional bonding. And it creates this really powerful bond because it's that chemical that bonds mothers to their babies and to their children. And in relationships, it creates that bond too. And so these are pretty intense things that are happening to somebody in an abusive relationship. Cortisol and adrenaline, the like I mentioned, released during the fear response, right? Abuse, conflict, and it can keep you in a chronic fight or flight state, which I feel like I lived in for, gosh, decades. I feel like I lived in this chronic fight or flight, like just never knowing what was going to happen when next. And so that it just creates this loop, right? And so trauma bonding is an intense thing that happens to victims that makes it really hard to get out of an abusive relationship. It also explains things like Stockholm syndrome, or where somebody is, kind of bonds with an abuser or a captor or something like that. And it's really hard to break because it is like breaking a drug addiction in a way, because of you kind of go into this dopamine oxytocin withdrawal, and the brain is really conditioned to associate the abusive partner with relief and safety because of this loop. And it just can create a really confusing and toxic cycle that it can be really hard to get out of, until, especially when you don't know what's happening. It can, when you know it's happening, it can kind of help you can see it, and encourage you to get out of it. So it just kind of creates this kind of addictive feeling to these brain chemicals and this toxic cycle you're in with somebody, to stay with them because of the intermittent reinforcement. It's the mixing abuse with kindness. And so anyway, so I'm going to read this letter to myself that has some, I would say, some pretty good examples of this in it. Okay, here we go. Dear Becky B, you were 24 years old and you just gave birth to your first child. You are so in love with her and with becoming a mother. The plan is for you to now be a stay-at-home mom, and this is what you want. It's another thing you have internalized from your church so far, is that ultimately it is better for women to be stay-at-home mothers. Prophets have stated this. You have been taught this. Your own mom has had a job since you were in elementary school, and this is another way you have correlated the problems your family is having with your older half-sisters to have been caused by your mom working instead of being home. You eventually place that blame on your dad too for a while. So you want to be a stay-at-home mom, as you have internalized it to mean that your family will not have the same problems. It is the best way to do it. And during this time, while you are a stay-at-home mom, you realize that your husband isn't really doing a lot of work. You have thought he was working and studying while you were working. And now you see that he sleeps in a lot. And he spends a lot of time talking on the phone to his parents. He doesn't have a full-time job. He does some apartment maintenance and helps his dad on jobs occasionally, and you think maybe this is because he's still in school. And then he finishes school and gets his first job working for someone other than his dad. He works in construction trades, and your dad did too. And so you know that sometimes that ebbs and flows. And so you're trying to figure this out, like what is happening? And you're giving him the benefit of the doubt. So, uh, oh, I got off track a little bit. So anyway, then he finishes school and gets his first job working for someone other than his dad. It doesn't last very long. He complains a lot about the work environment and what is expected of him. He eventually decides to quit working there, and you agree. You don't know enough yet to know that this is the beginning of a decades long patterns of employment and unemployment depending on his parents financially. You struggle with his lack of routine and a schedule, and you suggest looking for a new job and places he could look. But he wants to work with his dad and continue what he has been doing. You are still living in a one-bedroom apartment with a baby. The baby crib is in your bedroom. There isn't a lot of space for privacy or alone time. And you talk about wanting a bigger place, and he talks about his beliefs that you should save up enough cash to buy something rather than getting a mortgage. This belief of his, it goes across the board for cars, homes, expenses. And what you don't realize is that he uses a lot of his parents' cash for these things. You try to point out the obstacles with his belief system and that he has no credit and he has never had a loan or a credit card. And you try to educate him about these things. And you are starting to realize that he has been dependent on his parents for much longer than most people are. And you think this is because of their family culture is a little odd. But then you see one of his brothers eventually buys his own home and is able to maintain a job in the same construction field. Your baby is growing fast and you are craving another newborn. You're baby hungry. You become pregnant again before she is 1 year old. And you are worrying about money because your husband still doesn't have a job and you no longer have health insurance because it was through your work. He gets another job and is able to keep it until after you have the baby. And now you have two babies in a one-bedroom apartment. What you are coming to realize is that there's something really wrong in your marriage. You feel like it must be your fault somehow. Whenever you disagree with each other, he says it is your fault. You said something wrong, or you're having PMS, or you're too emotional, or you set him off somehow. A lot of things like that. Even if those things are true, he doesn't he's not able to have the patience in disagreements that you both need. Your second child is a few days old. Something you said or did set him off. You don't remember exactly what it was, something along the lines of needing some help. You are less than a week postpartum. He is yelling and throwing things. And you take both of your babies into the bedroom while you and close the door inside the dresser in front of the door so he can't get in. Then you sit on the bed holding two crying babies while you are crying too. You are terrified and think you should leave and wonder what is even happening. This is the first big and scary violent outburst you remember. He has punched holes in the doors before and replaced those, and you've seen him and his explosive temper even more after this now at home with you and with his parents and his brothers. And somehow when he apologizes, you stay and you don't tell anyone about what happened. He has relatives who are renting apartments in the same building, and you realize that people are overhearing these things when they happen. His mother calls and talks to him. The Relief Society president calls and talks to you and asks if you are okay. You are numb and frozen and postpartum, and you don't know what to do or say, so you say you are okay. Your husband keeps saying, there isn't any way to get a house. It's really hard to be living like this in a one-bedroom apartment, and there isn't enough room. One day he arranges for the man in the apartment next to you to move out, and then he cuts a doorway between the two apartment units, and then you have more room. 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. He did this without asking his parents for permission, and there aren't any consequences for him for doing this. Then there is another job change, and you don't have health insurance again, and he is back to being in and out all day and doing apartment maintenance and working with his dad occasionally, and you are back to being supported by his parents. When your second child is 1 year old, you and your husband start talking again about having another. You become pregnant again. You bring up again the need for a house so you can have some distance with apartment management work because it's stressful and there are people coming and interrupting your home all day in and day out at all hours. And you want your kids to have a place to play. You want to grow a garden. So you start looking for places to move. During the time you have been married, he has wanted to move to small towns in Utah, thinking he can get property for free that his family owns. You go and look at these places and you don't want to move there. You don't realize it yet, but you don't trust him, and your body doesn't trust him. And you don't want to move so far away from your family. You start looking at properties in Salt Lake, and you don't know it now, but you'll find out after your divorce that during this time he was telling his family and probably other people that you would divorce him if you didn't get a house. You realize then that he had done this as a way to manipulate his parents into buying property and funding his building of your house. This took 3 years, being supported by them again, and then paying for the lot and all the building materials. And you were really uncomfortable with this. You're grateful to them, but you can see the favoritism his parents play with their money, and you don't like feeling beholden or obligated to them, like you have to please them because they are supporting you and your kids. Because it took so much longer than expected to complete the house, you end up having 3 children in the apartments. Your third child came unexpectedly early, and you had to have an emergency C-section. And then a few days later, you had a pulmonary embolism. This is all without health insurance. Your dad is upset for you at your husband, who complains about the cost of this while you were writhing in pain in the emergency room. You're lucky you didn't die. Your parents know somebody who died of this same thing just days before you had it happen to you. But then your in-laws pay your medical bills. None of it feels great, and it takes you a long time to recover from the blood clot and having 3 children in under 4 years. You try to help finish the house as you are desperate to move there. You were mainly worried about the financial pieces at play and how much money your in-laws are spending. It is a challenging and difficult time period with a lot of conflict and a lot of domestic violence incidents. This is the time period where your dad asks you if you were being abused. You realize you just want a normal life, and you keep thinking it's going to happen. You haven't realized it yet, or you can't face it yet, that it's not going to happen in this marriage, that you are in a relationship where you are coerced and manipulated, and that you concede almost everything you want to keep the peace. With the shame that came along with all of this and the self-blame, you keep trying to improve yourself. You try to be the best Mormon mom you can. You try to do everything right so you can have the blessings that you have been promised. You have started trying to say and do everything he wants you to do, because if that's what sets him off, then you should be able to stop his violent outbursts if you can control yourself. You are slowly beginning to realize that it's a moving target, and no matter how hard you try, you don't seem to get it just right. You beg and plead with him to talk to the bishop to stop his behaviors of screaming and yelling, calling you degrading names, and the violence. What you don't know is that when he speaks to a bishop, he's not really confessing like you think he is, but he is creating this narrative where he can lay the groundwork to make you look crazy because he is blaming you. So far, this marriage is not what you thought it would be, and somehow you still think it has the potential to be. Maybe because you have been indoctrinated into believing that you are responsible for boys' and men's actions and behaviors. And because what is happening is all being kept hidden and you aren't getting any outside perspectives. You also have betrayal blindness, which means you somehow forget or block out the bad parts. And so when something happens again, you get caught off guard and you don't expect it to happen. And you're shocked almost. The first time you remember him driving recklessly, you're in the car with your 3 kids, driving down State Street. You're taking them to the movies to see one of the Star Wars films. You don't remember why, but he got so angry that he began punching the steering wheel and the dash with his hands, and the gas pedal and the brake and the clutch with his feet, so hard that something broke. The differential or something, you don't remember, and you're not a mechanic anyway, but something broke and you could barely pull over to a parking lot. And then you had to be picked up by his parents. You are in way over your head and you don't know what you need. He promises to work through these things with you, and you think that if you keep doing what you're supposed to, attending and serving at church, paying your tithing, going to the temple, forgiving him, praying together, you can solve these problems. He has said this many times. And you expect him to take the lead with these things because he is the supposed leader in your home. You have to continually remind him, though, and you think things don't get better because isn't consistent in his behavior with these practices. You keep trying to get him to be consistent. You keep trying to get him to do these things that have been promised to make you happy and have a happy life and a happy family. You've been continually taught that you are responsible for a man's actions, and he reinforces this every time there is a problem. You are tenacious, and in this situation, in your marriage, it isn't a good trait because he doesn't like you nagging him to do these things he has said he will do, and it creates a lot of friction. But you're desperate for things to get better, so you keep trying. But dear Becky B, you don't deserve to be treated like this. You deserve to be loved and to be safe. And your kids deserve to be loved and to be safe. He robbed some of this from you. He stole the experience of motherhood from you that you wanted with the criticism and the uncertainty and the walking on eggshells. You were doing the best you knew how to manage in a scary and hard situation. And you were doing what you thought was right. You deserve better. And you don't know what trauma bonding means, and you've never even heard of it, but it is the foundation of your marriage. And that is the conclusion of this episode.